Love becomes impossible to heal not because we are incapable of loving, but because love keeps landing on an old unhealed place inside us. Long before we learned the language of romance, our nervous system learned the language of survival. It learned what to expect, what to fear, what to suppress, and what to perform in order to stay connected. When love arrives in adulthood, it doesn't meet a blank slate. It meets a child still waiting to be seen, still hoping that this time it will be different, still bracing for the moment it disappears. This sermon is not about blaming parents or revisiting pain for its own sake. It is about understanding how early emotional experiences quietly shape who we attach to, how we bond, and why love so often feels like longing mixed with anxiety, devotion mixed with exhaustion, intimacy mixed with fear. Emotional neglect is one of the most misunderstood wounds because nothing obvious happened. There may have been food on the table, education, discipline, even affection, yet something essential was missing. The child did not feel emotionally met. Their inner world was not mirrored, named, or held with curiosity. When a child's emotions are consistently overlooked, minimized, or overwhelmed by the emotional needs of the adults around them, the child adapts by turning away from their own feelings. This is not a conscious decision. It is a biological strategy. The child learns that certain emotions threaten connection, so those emotions must be buried. Over time, the child becomes skilled at reading others while becoming disconnected from themselves. That disconnection becomes the foundation of adult love. As adults, we don't enter relationships looking for love alone. We enter looking for regulation, for soothing, for the safety we never fully felt. We may choose partners who feel familiar rather than safe. Familiarity often means emotional unpredictability, distance, or inconsistency, because that is what the nervous system recognizes as normal. When love feels calm, it can feel boring or unsettling. When love feels intense, it feels alive, even if it hurts. This is not because we enjoy pain, but because intensity resembles early emotional environments where love and stress were intertwined. Emotional neglect teaches a child that their needs are a burden. As adults, it shows up as difficulty asking for help, discomfort receiving care, and a deep fear of being too much or not enough. Love becomes a performance. We over-give, over-explain, over-function, hoping that if we are good enough, useful enough, quiet enough, or strong enough, we will finally be chosen. Yet no amount of external validation fills the space created by internal absence. The wound is not a lack of love from others, it is the absence of a relationship with one's own emotional experience. In relationships, this wound often manifests as anxiety, avoidance, or a painful combination of both. We may crave closeness but panic when it arrives. We may long to be known yet hide when someone truly sees us. This inner conflict is exhausting. Love feels like work because the nervous system is constantly scanning for danger. A delayed text becomes rejection. A boundary feels like abandonment. Conflict feels catastrophic because, to the child within, disconnection once meant emotional isolation. The tragedy of emotional neglect is not just what was missing, but what the child concluded about themselves. Children are meaning-making beings. When their emotions are unmet, they do not think my caregivers were overwhelmed or unavailable. They think my feelings don't matter, I don't matter. That belief becomes the lens through which love is experienced. We tolerate relationships that echo that belief. We stay where we are unseen because it confirms an old story that feels true, even if it hurts. Healing does not begin by fixing relationships. It begins by restoring the relationship with the self. This requires slowing down enough to notice what we feel without judging it. It requires learning to sit with discomfort instead of immediately abandoning ourselves to preserve connection. When we begin to honor our own emotional signals, we stop outsourcing our worth to love. We stop asking relationships to heal what only self-connection can address. Love becomes possible to heal when it is no longer asked to repair childhood wounds. When we approach love from wholeness rather than hunger, we choose differently, respond differently, and stay present even when fear arises. The work is not about becoming perfect partners. It is about becoming emotionally honest humans who can remain connected to themselves while being connected to others, learning that safety is not something we earn, but something we cultivate within the body, moment by moment, through awareness, compassion, and the courage to feel what was once too much to feel. Love activates survival, not safety, because the body learned about connection long before the mind learned about romance. The first relationships we ever experienced were not understood through words or logic, but through sensations in the nervous system. A baby does not analyze whether love is consistent or conditional. The body simply registers whether it is held, soothed, and emotionally attuned to. If early connection came with tension, unpredictability, or emotional absence, the nervous system adapted by staying alert. Love then became associated with vigilance rather than rest. When we grow up in environments where affection is inconsistent or emotionally unsafe, the body does not learn that connection is a place to soften. It learns that connection requires effort, anticipation, and self-monitoring. As adults, when intimacy appears, the nervous system reacts as if something important is at stake. The heart races, the stomach tightens, thoughts spiral. This reaction is not a flaw. It is the body doing exactly what it was trained to do, protect against potential loss, rejection, or emotional pain. This is why many people feel anxious at the beginning of relationships or emotionally numb once closeness deepens. Anxiety and numbness are two sides of the same survival response. One is hyperactivation, constantly reaching for reassurance. The other is shutdown, pulling away to avoid overwhelm. Neither is about lack of love. Both are about a system that never learned how to feel safe while connected. The body mistakes intimacy for danger because once upon a time closeness did not guarantee care. In survival mode, love becomes a task rather than an experience. We analyze text, tone, facial expressions, and silence. We read meaning into small shifts because, as children, small shifts once mattered. A caregiver's mood could change the emotional climate of the entire home. As adults, that sensitivity remains. We may call it intuition, but often it is hypervigilance. The body is scanning not for joy, but for threat. Even in healthy relationships, this can create exhaustion, as if love requires constant management. Survival-based love also explains why conflict feels unbearable to some people. Disagreement does not register as a normal part of intimacy, it registers as danger. The body remembers that conflict once led to emotional withdrawal, shame, or abandonment. So even calm conversations can trigger panic or collapse. We may shut down, lash out, or over-apologize, not because the present moment is unsafe, but because the past taught us that connection could disappear without warning. This survival response is not healed by reassurance alone. No partner can consistently convince a dysregulated nervous system that it is safe. The reassurance may soothe temporarily, but the body will return to its learned pattern. This is why people can be deeply loved yet still feel insecure. The wound is not relational in the present, it is physiological from the past. Love is being filtered through an old alarm system that never learned when to turn itself off. When love activates survival, we often confuse intensity with depth. Calm connection feels unfamiliar, even suspicious. Drama, emotional highs and lows, or uncertainty feel alive because they match early emotional rhythms. The body says this feels like love, not because it is nourishing, but because it is recognizable. Safety can feel dull or empty at first because the nervous system is not used to resting in connection. The shift from survival to safety does not happen through insight alone. Understanding why we react the way we do is helpful, but the body must experience safety repeatedly in small, embodied ways. This means learning to stay present when fear arises instead of acting it out or running from it. It means noticing sensations, breath, tension, and allowing them to move through without judgment. Over time, the nervous system begins to learn that closeness does not automatically lead to loss. As safety increases, love starts to feel different. It becomes less about proving worth and more about shared presence. The urgency softens. The need to control outcomes loosens. We begin to tolerate uncertainty without collapsing into fear. This is not because love has changed, but because the body has learned that connection no longer requires survival strategies. The nervous system slowly updates its understanding of intimacy, realizing that love can be a place where vigilance rests and the heart does not have to stay armored to stay connected. The nervous system remembers before the mind understands, because memory is not stored only in stories, but in sensations, impulses, and reflexes. Long before we could name emotions or explain experiences, our bodies were already learning what the world felt like. A child does not remember neglect as an event. The body remembers it as tension, as bracing, as an absence of warmth. These memories live beneath language, shaping reactions long after the original context has disappeared. This is why adults can say, "Nothing terrible happened," yet still feel uneasy in closeness or overwhelmed by intimacy. When something painful happens early in life, especially repeatedly, the nervous system adapts to ensure survival. It learns when to activate, when to shut down, and when to stay alert. These adaptations are intelligent responses to an environment that could not meet emotional needs. The problem is not that the nervous system learned these patterns, but that it continues to use them long after they are no longer necessary. The body keeps responding to present-day relationships as if they are past threats. This is why people often react in ways that feel disproportionate to the situation. A simple misunderstanding can trigger deep fear. A partner's distraction can evoke profound loneliness. These reactions are not irrational. They are rooted in implicit memory, the kind of memory that does not come with images or narratives, but with sensations and emotional states. The body remembers what the mind cannot easily recall. It remembers how unsafe it once felt to need, to express, to rely. Because these memories are stored in the nervous system, they cannot be reasoned away. Telling yourself that your partner loves you does not immediately calm a body that learned love could vanish. Logic operates in the thinking brain, while these reactions arise from deeper, older parts of the nervous system. This creates an internal split where one part of you understands the present, but another part is still living in the past. That split is often experienced as confusion, shame, or self-criticism. Many people try to heal by analyzing their childhood, hoping that insight will dissolve the pain. Insight can bring clarity, but clarity alone does not regulate a dysregulated nervous system. Healing requires experiences that contradict the old learning. The body must feel safety, not just understand it. This is why some people repeat patterns, even after years of therapy or self-work. The mind has moved on. but the nervous system has not yet caught up. In relationships, this shows up as automatic responses that bypass conscious choice. You may withdraw before you even realize you're hurt. You may cling before you realize you're afraid. These are not personality flaws, they are conditioned responses. The nervous system acts faster than thought because, once upon a time, speed mattered. Reacting quickly was how the child stayed connected or avoided emotional harm. The tragedy is that these responses often create the very outcomes we fear. Withdrawal can create distance. Clinging can overwhelm. Hypervigilance can exhaust both partners. Then the nervous system says, see, connection is dangerous, reinforcing the original belief. The cycle continues not because we are broken, but because the body is loyal to its early training. To change these patterns, we must work with the nervous system rather than against it. This means slowing down responses instead of judging them. It means learning to notice what happens in the body before reacting. Tightness in the chest, shallow breath, restlessness, numbness. These sensations are messages, not problems. They are signals from a younger part of us asking for safety, not correction. When we learn to stay present with these sensations without immediately acting them out, something begins to shift. The nervous system starts to experience a new possibility that intense feelings can arise and pass without leading to abandonment or collapse. This is how new learning occurs. Not through force, but through gentle repetition of safety in the midst of activation. Over time, the body learns to distinguish past from present. It learns that not every silence is rejection, not every boundary is abandonment, not every conflict is a threat to survival. This learning happens slowly because it is undoing years of conditioning. But it is profound because once the nervous system updates its understanding, love no longer has to fight against old memories. It no longer has to prove itself constantly. When the nervous system begins to feel safer, we gain access to choice. We can pause instead of react. We can speak instead of shut down. We can stay present even when discomfort arises. Love becomes less about managing fear and more about shared humanity. The body starts to trust that connection does not require losing oneself, that intimacy does not automatically lead to pain, that it is possible to be fully present without being overwhelmed, without disappearing, without bracing for what comes next. Unmet childhood needs do not disappear with age. They transform. What a child could not ask for safely becomes what an adult unconsciously seeks through relationships. As children, we depend entirely on caregivers not just for physical survival, but for emotional regulation, reassurance, and a sense of belonging. When those needs are inconsistently met or ignored, the child adapts by lowering expectations and suppressing desire. The need itself, however, does not vanish, it waits. It embeds itself in the psyche and the nervous system, quietly shaping adult attachment patterns. In adulthood, relationships become the stage where these unmet needs replay themselves. We may feel an intense pull towards certain people without understanding why. Often these people resemble early caregivers not in obvious ways, but in emotional availability. A distant partner mirrors an emotionally absent parent. An unpredictable partner reflects a caregiver whose love came and went. The attraction is not random. The nervous system is drawn to what feels familiar, even if it was painful, because familiarity once meant survival. This is how childhood wounds turn into adult patterns. A child who had to earn attention may become an adult who gives in relationships, hoping that generosity will secure love. A child who learned that emotions were unwelcome may become an adult who struggles to express needs, then feels resentful when those needs go unmet. A child who is left to self-soothe may become fiercely independent, avoiding reliance on others while secretly longing for closeness. These patterns are not conscious choices. They are adaptive strategies carried forward into a new context. Many people believe they are choosing partners freely, but often they are reenacting unfinished emotional business. The relationship becomes less about the person in front of them and more about the hope that this time the story will end differently. This time I will be chosen. This time I will be enough. This time my needs will matter. The tragedy is that we often choose partners who cannot give what we are seeking, not because we enjoy suffering, but because the nervous system does not yet recognize healthy availability as love. When unmet childhood needs drive relationships, love becomes charged with urgency. Small interactions carry disproportionate weight. A delayed response can feel devastating. A moment of closeness can feel intoxicating. The adult relationship is burdened with the emotional weight of a child's unmet longing. No partner, no matter how loving, can carry that weight indefinitely. This is why relationships driven by unmet needs often feel exhausting, unstable, or chronically disappointing. These patterns also shape how we behave within relationships. We may silence ourselves to avoid conflict, repeating a childhood strategy of staying small to preserve connection. We may become controlling, trying to manage the relationship to prevent abandonment. We may oscillate between closeness and distance, torn between the need for connection and the fear of losing ourselves. Each behavior once served a purpose. As a child, they helped us adapt. As adults, they often keep us stuck. The painful irony is that these patterns can block the very intimacy we desire. When we abandon ourselves to maintain connection, we lose authenticity. When we suppress needs, resentment grows. When we cling, we push others away. The relationship becomes a battlefield between the past and the present. We are responding not just to what is happening now, but to what never happened then. Awareness is a critical step, but awareness alone does not dissolve these patterns. It is not enough to see the pattern, the underlying need must be acknowledged and validated. Many people try to outgrow their needs, shaming themselves for wanting reassurance, closeness, or care. But unmet needs do not heal through denial, they heal through recognition. The child within needs to know that their longing makes sense, that it was never wrong to need comfort, attention, or consistency. Healing begins when we stop demanding that relationships meet needs that were never meant to be carried by a romantic partner alone. This does not mean becoming emotionally isolated or self-sufficient in a rigid way. It means developing an internal capacity to respond to our own emotional states. When we learn to offer ourselves the validation, soothing, and presence we once sought externally, relationships shift. They become places of connection rather than compensation. As this internal relationship strengthens, attraction patterns begin to change. We may find ourselves less drawn to emotionally unavailable people. We may tolerate less dysfunction. We may feel bored by drama and more interested in steadiness. This is not because we have lowered our standards, but because the nervous system no longer needs to chase familiarity rooted in pain. When adult relationships are no longer tasked with healing childhood wounds, love becomes lighter. Expectations become clearer. Boundaries feel safer. We can see partners more realistically without projecting unmet needs onto them. Connection becomes a choice rather than a compulsion. We are no longer asking love to complete us, but to accompany us. The past loosens its grip, not because it has been erased, but because it is no longer running the present from behind the scenes. We confuse intensity with intimacy because intensity feels like aliveness to a nervous system that learned to associate love with emotional charge. When early relationships were marked by inconsistency, unpredictability, or emotional absence, the body adapted by staying alert. That alertness became the baseline. As adults, calm connection can feel unfamiliar, even empty, while emotional highs and lows feel meaningful. Intensity grabs attention. It floods the system with sensation. Intimacy, by contrast, requires presence, slowness, and safety, all of which can feel strangely uncomfortable to someone whose body never learned to rest in connection. Intensity often comes from uncertainty. Not knowing where you stand keeps the nervous system activated. Waiting for a message, analyzing tone, anticipating the next emotional shift. These experiences generate adrenaline and dopamine, chemicals associated with survival and reward. The body interprets this activation as passion. The mind calls it chemistry. But chemistry is not the same as connection. It is a physiological response, not a measure of emotional depth. True intimacy grows in predictability. It emerges when two people can be present without performing, without casing, without bracing for impact. For someone shaped by early emotional wounds, this kind of steadiness can feel threatening. Without intensity, old feelings of emptiness or invisibility may surface. The relationship no longer distracts from the internal void. So the nervous system seeks stimulation, mistaking drama for depth and longing for love. This is why many people find themselves bored in healthy relationships yet consumed by unstable ones. The unstable relationship keeps the inner child occupied. There is always something to fix, prove, or wait for. The healthy relationship asks a different question: can you stay present when nothing is wrong? For many, that question is far more challenging than enduring chaos. Intensity also allows us to avoid vulnerability. When emotions are heightened, there is movement and noise. We can focus on the other person's behavior instead of our own inner world. Intimacy, however, requires being seen as we are. It involves exposing needs, fears, and longings without the shield of drama. For someone who learned early that vulnerability was unsafe or ignored, this exposure can feel terrifying. Intensity feels safer because it keeps the focus external. Another reason intensity is mistaken for intimacy is that it mirrors early attachment experiences. If love once came with anxiety or emotional unpredictability, then those sensations feel familiar. Familiarity is comforting to the nervous system, even when it hurts. Safety, on the other hand, can feel foreign. The body may interpret calm as disinterest or distance, not because it is, but because calm was never part of the original template for love. This confusion often leads to cycles of attraction and disappointment. We chase intense connections, hoping they will finally deliver the closeness we crave. When they inevitably fail to provide stability, we feel abandoned or disillusioned. Then, when we encounter someone emotionally available, we may sabotage the connection, unconsciously recreating the intensity we equate with love. The pattern repeats, not because we are incapable of intimacy, but because our nervous system has not yet learned how intimacy feels. Social narratives reinforce this confusion. We are taught that love should be fiery, overwhelming, and all-consuming. We romanticize obsession and longing. Rarely do we celebrate emotional safety, consistency, and mutual regulation, yet these quieter qualities are what allow intimacy to deepen over time. Intensity burns quickly. Intimacy grows slowly. One exhausts the nervous system, the other nourishes it. The shift from intensity to intimacy requires grieving. We must grieve the fantasy that love will come in a dramatic form and rescue us from old pain. We must mourn the relationships that felt powerful but could never be sustaining. This grief is not just about people. It is about letting go of a familiar emotional landscape. The nervous system resists this loss because it feels like giving up what it knows. Learning intimacy means tolerating calm without interpreting it as absence. It means staying present when there is no chase, no threat, no emotional spike. It means allowing connection to unfold without urgency. This can feel dull or uncomfortable at first, but over time, the body begins to recognize a different kind of aliveness. One rooted not in anxiety, but in attunement. As we relearn intimacy, our definition of attraction changes. We become less interested in emotional roller coasters and more drawn to steadiness. We start to value how we feel in someone's presence rather than how intensely we react to them. Love stops feeling like something we fall into and more like something we grow within. The nervous system gradually learns that connection does not have to hurt to be real, that closeness does not require chaos, and that intimacy is not found in intensity, but in the quiet, consistent experience of being emotionally met. Self-abandonment begins as a survival strategy. When a child learns that expressing needs, emotions, or preferences threatens connection, the child adapts by turning away from themselves. They listen more closely to the emotional state of others than to their own inner signals. They become attuned, accommodating, and compliant, not because they are naturally selfless, but because staying connected required it. Over time, this adaptation becomes an identity. The child grows into an adult who believes love must be earned through self-erasure. In adult relationships, self-abandonment often looks like generosity, flexibility, or devotion. On the surface, it can appear healthy or even admirable, but beneath it lies a quiet fear: if I am fully myself, I will be left. So needs are postponed, boundaries softened, discomfort swallowed. The relationship stays intact, but the self slowly disappears. Love is maintained at the cost of authenticity. This hidden cost accumulates. Every time we ignore our feelings to keep the peace, we reinforce the belief that our inner world is less important than the relationship. Every time we override our limits to avoid conflict, the body learns that safety lies in self-betrayal. Over time, this creates emotional numbness or resentment. We may not even know what we want anymore, only that something feels wrong. Self-abandonment also distorts power dynamics in relationships. When one person consistently sacrifices their needs, the relationship loses balance. The other person may become the emotional center, consciously or unconsciously. This imbalance can breed dependency on one side and entitlement or withdrawal on the other. Neither position allows for true intimacy, because intimacy requires two whole selves, not one self orbiting another. The paradox of self-abandonment is that it is often motivated by a deep desire for closeness, yet it prevents genuine connection. When we hide parts of ourselves, we are loved only for what we present, not for who we are. Even when a partner offers care, it can feel unsatisfying because they are responding to a version of us that is filtered and incomplete. The longing remains not because love is absent, but because we are not fully present. Many people who self-abandon are unaware they are doing it. They may describe themselves as easygoing, low maintenance, or adaptable. They pride themselves on being understanding. But underneath is a chronic disregard for their own emotional signals. Fatigue, irritability, anxiety, and depression often emerge as the body's way of protesting a life lived out of alignment with inner truth. Self-abandonment is reinforced by social messages that equate love with sacrifice. We are taught that enduring discomfort is a sign of commitment. While relationships do require compromise, self-abandonment is not compromise. Compromise involves choice and mutual respect. Self-abandonment involves fear and the silencing of self. One strengthens relationships, the other erodes the person within them. Healing self-abandonment does not mean becoming rigid or self-centered. It means developing the capacity to stay connected to oneself while staying in relationship. This begins with noticing. Noticing when the body tightens, when resentment arises, when exhaustion sets in. These are not inconveniences, they are information. They signal moments where the self is being left behind. As we begin to honor these signals, discomfort often increases temporarily. Saying no may feel terrifying, expressing needs may trigger guilt or fear of rejection. This is not a sign that something is wrong. It is evidence that old survival patterns are being challenged. The nervous system is learning that connection does not have to require disappearance. When self-connection strengthens, relationships shift. Some relationships deepen because there is now honesty and reciprocity. Others may fall away not because we are less loving, but because the relationship depended on our self-erasure. This loss can be painful, but it is also clarifying. It reveals which connections are rooted in mutual presence rather than sacrifice. As self-abandonment loosens its grip, love becomes less about holding on and more about showing up. We no longer stay silent to preserve harmony at any cost. We trust that our needs, limits, and emotions belong in the relationship. This trust is not a demand that others meet us perfectly, but a commitment to not disappear from our own lives. Love becomes a space where two people can meet without either having to leave themselves behind. Compassion is the beginning of healing, not self-improvement. Because the wounds that make love feel impossible are not moral failings or character flaws, they are survival strategies. Too often, we approach our inner pain with judgment. I shouldn't feel this way. I shouldn't need this. I shouldn't react like that. But judgment creates shame, and shame tightens the nervous system, reinforcing patterns of self-abandonment, fear, and mistrust. True healing begins when we replace judgment with curiosity, harshness with gentleness, and self-criticism with understanding. Compassion allows the inner child to be seen, acknowledged, and held without conditions. Compassion recognizes that every response we developed in childhood was, at one time, adaptive. The ways we learned to manage fear, neglect, or inconsistency were necessary for survival. When a child suppresses needs, becomes hypervigilant, or emotionally disengages, the body is not broken. It is trying to protect. In adulthood, these strategies may no longer serve the same purpose, but they deserve recognition, not punishment. By approaching ourselves with compassion, we honor the fact that these patterns were born out of necessity and courage. When we cultivate compassion toward ourselves, we start to notice subtle layers of emotional life that were previously ignored. Tightness in the chest, a sinking feeling in the stomach, or the urge to withdraw from intimacy are no longer signs of failure. They are signals from a younger part of us that experienced pain and still carries it. Compassion allows us to listen deeply to these messages rather than act against them. This listening is not indulgence. It is training the nervous system to feel safe with its own experience. Self-compassion also transforms how we relate to others. When we stop demanding that partners or friends fix what we could not get as children, relationships shift from being arenas of anxiety and expectation into spaces of mutual presence. Compassion teaches that we do not need to extract love through performance or manipulation. We can simply participate fully, as whole beings, while allowing the other person to be themselves. This shift alone begins to untangle the patterns that once made love feel impossible. The practice of compassion is not a single act, but a continual engagement. It means noticing when old fears arise, fear of abandonment, fear of being too much or too little, and responding gently rather than reacting impulsively. It involves naming emotions, allowing them to exist, and acknowledging their origins without judgment. Compassion builds a bridge between the child who once felt unseen and the adult who is capable of witnessing that child now. Many people confuse self-improvement with healing. They focus on fixing habits, correcting behaviors, or achieving milestones that supposedly make them worthy of love. While self-growth can be valuable, it does not address the core wound, the sense of being unsafe in one's own body and emotions. Compassion bypasses performance and goes straight to presence. It allows love to land not as a reward for being good enough, but as a natural experience for a human who is learning to inhabit themselves fully. When compassion is present, the nervous system begins to recalibrate. Fear no longer has the final word. Old patterns of withdrawal, hypervigilance, or self-silencing start to loosen. We begin to notice that connection can be steady, closeness can be safe, and intimacy can feel nourishing rather than threatening. Compassion does not erase the past, but it creates a container in which the past no longer dictates how love is experienced in the present. Ultimately, compassion transforms the relationship we have with ourselves. We learn that our needs are legitimate, our emotions are valid, and our presence is enough. The inner child who once waited in anxiety begins to feel held. From this foundation, all other aspects of love, trust, connection, vulnerability, joy can begin to grow. Compassion is not a goal to achieve or a technique to master. It is the ongoing practice that opens the door to genuine healing and allows love to be experienced in its fullness. Relearning love through emotional safety and presence requires more than knowing what love should feel like. It requires retraining the body and nervous system to recognize safety. Most of us enter relationships carrying the implicit assumption that closeness equals danger, that intimacy carries risk, and that emotional needs are liabilities. This assumption is not conscious. It is encoded in early experiences, in the rhythms of neglect, inconsistency, or emotional unavailability. To relearn love, we must first create conditions where the nervous system can experiment with something different: consistency, attunement, and the permission to feel without fear. Emotional safety begins within. It is the practice of being fully present with one's own experience, without judgment or suppression. When tension, fear, longing, or sadness arise, we pause and allow them to exist, noticing how the body responds, what memories surface, and what the child within is asking for. This is not about avoiding discomfort. It is about approaching it with curiosity. Presence means we do not rush, distract, or perform to manipulate outcomes. We witness, we breathe, and we stay connected to our inner world. When presence is cultivated internally, it naturally extends to relationships. We learn to engage with others from a grounded, regulated state rather than from the reflex of survival. In this space, we can communicate needs clearly, receive love without suspicion, and respond to intimacy without driven patterns. Emotional safety is not about controlling the other person. It is about holding ourselves steady in the midst of relational dynamics. Over time, this steadiness becomes contagious. Others can respond from their own regulated state, creating a positive feedback loop of mutual attunement. Relearning love also involves undoing the association between intensity and connection. When the nervous system begins to trust that safety is possible, we discover that calm, steady presence feels nourishing rather than empty. The highs and lows of drama are no longer mistaken for passion. Instead, we begin to value the subtle rhythms of shared attention, empathy, and authenticity. These are the threads that weave intimacy, not the spikes of adrenaline or the fear of loss. This process requires patience. The nervous system cannot unlearn decades of conditioned responses overnight. Relational triggers will continue to arise. Moments of panic, jealousy, or withdrawal will surface. The difference is that with presence and safety, we begin to observe these moments without being hijacked by them. We respond from awareness rather than reactivity. We comfort the younger self while engaging as the adult self. Love stops being a battlefield and becomes a laboratory, a space where new patterns can be practiced, tested, and internalized. Relearning love also means redefining what we consider acceptable in relationships. We no longer tolerate neglect, inconsistency, or violation because we recognize the physiological and emotional consequences of returning to old patterns. Boundaries are not walls. They are expressions of self-respect and tools for maintaining safety. Presence teaches that saying no, asking for what we need, or stepping back when overwhelmed is not rejection. It is a way to keep love alive and sustainable. As emotional safety deepens, trust emerges, not just trust in others, but trust in ourselves. We learn that we can navigate intimacy without being consumed by it. We learn that vulnerability does not necessitate annihilation. We learn that love is not a prize to be won or a condition to be met, but a lived experience that unfolds moment by moment, guided by attunement, respect, and authenticity. Through consistent practice, the nervous system gradually rewires. The body begins to recognize that connection can be safe, that needs can be expressed without fear of abandonment, and that closeness can coexist with autonomy. Old survival patterns loosen their grip, giving space for curiosity, joy, and spontaneity. Love, once experienced as risk and anxiety, starts to feel like home. In this way, the journey of relearning love is both gentle and revolutionary. Gentle because it unfolds in moments of attention and presence, and revolutionary because it transforms the very blueprint of how we inhabit relationships and ourselves.